Alright, so here we go. This is what we're going to do. We are going to lay out in Dreamweaver this site. Notice that it is 960 pixels wide. The header is 960 pixels wide and 2 rows, which make it 160 because each of these squares is 80 pixels square. So we see that this is 160. 80 plus 80 is 160. We also see that this column is 160 pixels wide because knowing that these squares are 80 each, there's 2 of them, so that's 160. This column has 3 columns, the right nav or right bar, and therefore it is 240. So if we have 5 here and we here and here, and these have to equal 12, that leaves 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 7 is 560 pixels. Okay, and we also see that the footer, even though the orange only goes partially up, we're going to cut that as the footer. Okay, so the footer is going to be 80 pixels. So let's go back to Dreamweaver and begin. Okay, we changed the title to working, and you can call it whatever you wish just by going up to title, and I'm going to call it working file. Okay, so you can see by changing it up here, it changes it here. Now all the action that we're going to do will take place inside the body tag. So let's create a container div that's going to contain everything that we do henceforth. So I'm going to go up to insert, and I'm going to insert a div tag. Okay, by clicking that you get this. So at the insertion point, I'm going to create a div called container. Okay, and since we have absolutely no CSS rules yet, we know that we can create a new CSS rule. In fact, we have to. So let's begin. So it's an ID container, and we're going to put the CSS in this document so I can show you how to change that later. Okay, so here the container is going to be under block, 960 pixels wide, and for temporary purposes we'll just call it 480 high. We're going to remove this in the end. Okay, and in order to center that on the page, we have to make a margin right auto and a margin left auto. That will center it in the page. And just so we can see what's going on, let's put a background color, and we're going to take this away, or let's make it red or whatever you want to do. Okay, so now it created the CSS rule over here, you see, but it didn't put the HTML between the bodies, and it won't until we hit OK. So now we have in the body the div that's we're going to use to contain all of the next divs that we create, and also just above it in a section called style you can see that the background is going to be red, the height is going to be 480, the width is going to be 960, and with a margin right auto and a margin left auto, it's going to be centered. And so if I save that, well, I don't have to, because all I need to do to view in the browser, I go up to this little earth symbol, pick Firefox for our purposes here, and hit save, and you will see the red box that's 960 pixels wide by 480 pixels high. Everything that we do will be contained in this box. Now just for an aid, you don't have to, but if you were to go to Moose Loose and go to CSS 960 grid guide, if you were to copy this little bit of code here, go back to your Dreamweaver and paste it in the container rule, and you'll notice that it says design helper, please delete. You can delete this when you're all done, but when you look at your site now, it should have 12 grids. This will help you when you're designing your grid structure to see if you're doing it right as you move along. Okay, let's begin. Inside the div, container, this is what we have to do. This is a big mistake that many people make. Highlight the content for ID container goes here text and hit return a whole bunch of times. Make sure it's way down there because everything that we do is going to be inside the container. Let's create the header. Okay, we have the insertion point between the opening container div and the closing container div. So we have the little insertion marker right there. Let's insert another div. This time we're going to call it header. Oops. And we don't have a header rule, so let's create one for it. New CSS rule. Okay, so it tells you what we're going to do right there. In this document only, hit OK. Okay, so we now know that we have a header being created here. And we know that it's going to be 960 pixels wide. And how many pixels high? Well, 2 squares, and each square is 80. So let's make it 160. Okay. So now we have a header inside the container that's going to be 960 by 160. But let's put a background image in it. Let's put our header background image. So if we go to background and background image, we can go in and pick our header. Okay, and there it is. So in this one we have the height, the width and the height, and we have the background. So we hit OK. Okay, notice that you notice if we could get to it that it put the header style in, but it didn't put the HTML in. It will only put it there if we hit OK. Okay, so here we have our container, and inside the container we have our header div right there. This is where the container begins. This is where the container ends. But nested inside the container is the header. Should we take a look? Yeah, let's take a look. Let's preview in Firefox. It'll ask us to save. And all of a sudden we have the header in place. Okay, good job. Now let's go back to Dreamweaver and create the left bar. Let's call it left bar. So we go to insert div and we're going to call it left bar. No spaces or special characters. Do we have a rule for left bar? No. So let's create a new one. Okay, left bar in this document only. Hit OK. And we know that this one is going to be two columns wide, which 2 times 80 is 160. Okay, there's that. Now this time we're going to have to make it go float left. That'll make it go towards the left and everything will stack towards the left as if the gravity was now on the left side of the page. Okay, really, that is all we need right now. But just for fun, we're going to go to the background and we're going to pick a color just so that we can make sure that that column is falling in the right place. We will remove the background color when we're done designing. So hit OK and OK. So looky, we have the header graphic, the header div here, and now we have the content for the left bar, and you'll see that it is writing the rules for us up here. So I always test. Whenever I do something, I always test. Okay, so not only do we have our blue column, but you can see with our column guide that it is exactly pixel perfect to where it needs to be. Okay, so we're doing everything right so far. So let's go back to Dreamweaver, and now we want our content area. So making sure that this also is between the container opening and the container close, let's put our next div in. So we're going to go insert, yeah, And let's call this content area. We can call this whatever we want because we're the webmasters. Now, do we have a content area rule yet? No. So let's create a new one. Okay, this lets us know what it's going to be called. And this document only. Cool. Now we know that we should probably put a color in here just to make sure things are working good as we're designing. Then we go to box, and because we know this is 7 columns, 7 times 80 is 560, and we have to float it left so that it will come to the right of the left bar. I'm sure you understand that by now. So we have a background of green and a box that is 560 pixels wide. So let's hit OK. And it wrote the rule, and now the next step is having it write the HTML. Okay, so here we go. The header, left bar, content area. Okay, let's save and take a look. Good. So now we see the blue is absolutely perfect to the 2 columns, and we now see that the green is absolutely perfect to the 7 columns. Good. Now let's do 3 columns here. Okay, so we're going to put it right in between the container opening and the container close. It has to be in between that because that's why it's called a container. Okay, so now we'll insert another div. At the insertion point, we're going to call this right bar or something like that. Now, is there a rule for right bar? No, there isn't, so let's create one. Okay, right bar, correct. This document only, cool. Hit OK. Let's see. Let's put a background color just so we can make sure that it's lining up good. And we're going to remove those. Then for the box, we're going to make it 3 columns, which makes it 240. 80 times 3 is 240. And we're going to float it left. Background, a color. Box, 240 wide, float left. That should be all we need. Okay, it created the rule. Now we have to create the HTML, so hit OK. And there it is. Here's the right bar, container area, left bar, header. Let's see. Did Dreamweaver write the rule for us? Yes. Background color blue, float left with 240. So let's check our work to make sure everything is good. You save it, and look. That div is exactly 3 columns. 2 columns. Good. So everything is working out really good. Okay. Now let's do the footer. What we're going to do is make sure we put our insertion point between the opening container and the closing container because the container is going to contain the footer too. Okay, so let's go to insert. Yes, at the insertion point, we're going to call this footer. Do we have a rule for the footer? No, we do not. So let's create the new CSS rule. Okay, so here we go. Footer, this document only. So let's make the background image our footer graphic that we created earlier. So now the footer is in there. Now, how high is that going to be? Well, because it was 1 row, and we know that that's going to be 80 pixels because 1 times 80 is 80. And because we are not going to clear this with the other 3 rows, let's clear both. That gets rid of the float that we have in the 3 divs above. So let's hit OK. Okay, it created the rule. Now it has to create the HTML. So we hit OK, and there's the footer. So let's see what we did. I'm going to save it. And now we have the footer. Now you're wondering why it's up that high. It's because we put in order to design and see that we were doing things correctly, we put a 480 height, but this footer is going to go down according to how much content we have in the 3 upper. But we can see right now that it is perfectly lined up with the column guide that we created. Okay, now let's clean this up a little bit. Let's go back to the container, and we don't want this grid anymore. In fact, we want to delete everything that says delete. That was our colorful pastel guides. Instead, let's put, for the background of the container, let's go back up to our CSS and double click our container, and for the background, let's get rid of the color and browse to our BG, our background JPEG that we created earlier. Okay, it's beautiful. Now if we save it and look, we can see that the columns are now going to go down. Okay, let's finish this up. Let's clean up our design aids. First of all, in the container, we want to get rid of the height 480. It's almost never a good idea to have a height in the container. Clean up this little space there. And for the header, everything is beautiful there. For the left bar, let's get rid of the background color. For the container A, let's get rid of the background color. We don't need that anymore. That was all just to help us design and make sure the columns and the divs are falling. So right bar, let's get rid of that background color. And we have the footer. Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, now we can see that everything is in place. All we have to do is replace the content. Let's get rid of some of this other stuff like we do not need. This for the header, get rid of that altogether, and this for the footer, we could probably get rid of that for now. It might be a good idea to keep the content text here just so when we start designing the page. So I'm going to save, take a look, view in Firefox, and our site is ready to put content.